Okay, so we are live on YouTube. Hello to anybody who's watching. Welcome to anyone joining us. Really pleased that you can join us for our last session of Fascinate. Hopefully you'll recognise a couple of faces if you've been to a couple of the sessions this week, but don't worry if not, because everyone will introduce themselves. If you do have any questions for the team about careers or anything STEM related, or to be honest, anything in general, I think we'll take any questions today. Pop them in the YouTube chat and we can answer them live, or if you're watching this afterwards, I just got a bit of an echo myself. If you're watching afterwards recorded, then you can pop them in the chat and we will come back to you later. Okay, so if we start with a couple of introductions, Danielle, do you want to go first and just tell us a bit about you, your job, your life, anything STEM related?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Danielle and I'm an apprentice radiotherapy engineer. I'll just share a few pictures so you've got a bit of a better idea of what I do. So I work in a cancer hospital. I work on linear accelerators, or they're called LINACs, that are used for radiotherapy treatments. So radiotherapy works by delivering really high energy X-rays. So these are X-rays that are about 100 times more powerful than an X-ray you might have on your hand, into cells to damage the DNA. The cells are then unable to grow. The cancer cells can't recover as well, whilst the healthy tissue is able to recover. So over lots of small treatments called fractions, patients are delivered these really high energy X-rays so that the cancer cells over time die off and the healthy tissue remains. So this is done by a linear accelerator. So it works by accelerating electrons to almost the speed of light up to a tungsten target, which it hits, and then photons or X-rays are released. The machine then rotates around the patient so that the treatment can be delivered from lots of different angles and the beam can be shaped so that it's the shape of the cancer tumour. But I don't deliver the treatments myself. Instead, I'm an engineer and I help to maintain the machines and fix faults on them. So this gives you a bit of an idea of what it looks like on the inside. There's lots of electronics. There's also lots of mechanical parts. It's a really varied machine, which I love. I get to learn about lots of different parts. So this is an example of another service job which we did. We needed to tighten one of the bolts under here. So this is the base that the patient bed normally fits on, but we had to lift it up with the crane and then tighten one of the bolts underneath. This took about a day to take everything apart, to tighten the bolts and then put everything back together. So sometimes it can be really big jobs, sometimes it's a lot smaller. So I have to learn about lots of different areas of the machine for my job. We have lots of high voltages, especially in the back of the machine to generate the electrons. It goes up to 47 kilovolts, which is very high voltage. We then have to learn about physics as well, to learn about how to accelerate the electrons and how to, using bending magnets, to direct them down the waveguide so that we can make sure they hit target at the end. We also have vacuum systems because we don't want air in the way of the electrons. So a lot of the system is under vacuum, and it's also water cooled as well to stop it getting too hot and control the temperature of everything inside. There's also then the mechanical systems as everything rotates around the patient. So it's something that I really love about my job, that it is so varied. Backwards. There we go. So I'm currently doing an apprenticeship scheme, but I finished my A-levels at sixth form. I did A-levels in maths, further maths and physics. And then I went to university for a year. I originally went to go and study physics, but then I decided that university wasn't for me. So I left university and came home. And then since I've been doing an apprenticeship scheme. So I'm now doing a degree as an apprentice instead. I'm doing a 4.5-year apprenticeship and I'm studying an electrical and electronic engineering degree. So my degree is all about understanding electronic circuits, how they work and how to build them for different purposes. I then do on-the-job training as well so that I can learn about LINACs and can learn to service and fix them. But I also do external training courses as well, such as our manufacturer's course. I really love my job and there's always something new to learn and every day is different. I love being able to use my problem solving skills. and being able to get hands-on practical experience, which is a really good benefit of apprenticeships. They give you a chance to study and qualify in industry relevant courses. I love the fact that I'm able to work at the same time as studying, and it's funded by my employer. So my employer pays for my degree, and I'm able to get a salary and work at the same time. So it's a really good balance for me. So that's a bit about my job. I'll pass on to somebody else.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. Jill, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Danielle. That was really, really interesting. I love hearing about all the electronics and engineering that goes into those machines, because as a biologist, I'm really interested in what machines like that do to the human body. So it's great to know that there's so much going on inside the machines, and there's people like you that are trained on how to fix them and make sure they do their jobs. So yeah, my name is, well, it's Dr. Jill Johnson, but you don't need to call me doctor. I'm okay if everyone just calls me Jill. I don't usually use my title all that much. And my current job is a senior lecturer at Aston University in Birmingham. So as part of my job is doing research. So I run a biomedical science research lab. I'm specifically interested in scar tissue formation. So if anyone has a scar somewhere on their skin, I've got a really big one on my hand here, the result of a kitchen accident about 10 years ago. But you'll see that the skin looks a little bit different. So you'll see that the pigment is a little bit different. And scar tissue also doesn't have either hair follicles or sweat glands on it. So the structure of the skin is different as well. So I'm really interested in what happens with scar tissue inside our bodies. So I specifically study lung diseases. So allergic asthma is a really big one. So anyone you know, or you might have asthma yourself, who gets wheezy if you breathe in something that you're allergic to, or if you breathe in something kind of non-specific, like exhaust fumes from a big lorry or cigarette smoke or something, makes you feel really ill and wheezy. So I study what happens to the lungs inside in asthma. So there's actually scar tissue that forms around the big airways in your lungs, and that is partially why people get wheezy. So I'm really interested in the mechanisms of how that happens. So I want to know what cell types are involved in causing that scar tissue to form. I'm interested in how those cell types talk to each other, so what signals they pass back and forth to each other, at what point in the response, because it changes quite a bit over time. And I'm also really interested in how these cells move. So I've recently done some very interesting work looking at blocking how these cells that form the scar, how they move into the airway wall. And I'm really hopeful that that might lead to a new treatment for allergic asthma someday that might make wheezy people feel better. So in addition to all of that research, I'm also a teacher. So I teach everyone at the university in the biomedical sciences department, and that goes from year one students that have just come to uni and they're very new to doing a university degree, all the way up to PhD students who have completed their degree. Some of them have also done a master's degree, and then they come to do a PhD or a doctorate to learn how to be a researcher. So for first year students, I teach them immunology. So that is the part of the body that reacts to viruses and bacteria and other pathogens that make us ill. So it's basically looking at how our bodies fight off infections. So I do some lectures on that. I teach some other lectures in year 2 and year 3 on the molecular basis of disease. So why do diseases actually happen? Is it a problem with our genes, or is it a problem with the environment? More often, it's actually a combination of the two. And then finally, in the master's degree, I teach some really interesting material on regenerative medicine, which is really, really exciting. So talking about how we can heal our bodies after they've been injured, or if someone has some sort of disease that causes damage over time, learning about how transplantations work, and then trying to figure out if there are ways that we might be able to potentially grow new organs in the future. So if someone, for example, needs a kidney transplant, instead of them having to, see if they can find a living donor or waiting for, unfortunately, someone who's a match to pass away, maybe in the lab someday, we'll be able to build new kidneys from cells we take from that person. And that way, that solves a lot of problems of, where are these organs coming from? and what treatments we need to keep that organ healthy inside a person after they've had a transplant. So I've always wanted to pursue a career in STEM. I did my first degree in biology and pharmacology. So pharmacology is basically how drugs work in the body and how the body deals with drugs. So if you take a paracetamol tablet, how does the body process that medicine that's in the tablet? And then what does the medicine do to the different cells and tissues in your body? I don't really have a typical day in the lab. Every day is different, whether I'm teaching. Sometimes I teach to a large class, like 200 students at once. Sometimes I teach to a small tutorial with only 5 or 6 students. Other days I'm in the lab from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. doing science. It's different every day, and I find that really, really exciting. So if you have any questions about pursuing a career as a scientist at the university level, please pop those into the chat, and I'd really love to hear from you and what you would like to think about doing with science in the future in your careers as well.
Okay, thank you, Jill. That was really interesting. And I think there are so many things that you don't realise people are researching all the time that are just like day-to-day things that happen. So it's really interesting to hear about, and to hear about what you're looking at now and where you think it might lead to. So thank you very much. And last but not least, we will hand over to Eleanor.
Hi, yeah, that was so interesting. It was really cool to hear more about what both of you are doing in a bit more detail. So yeah, I'm Eleanor. I am a bit earlier in my career, so I am a STEM student. I've just graduated from the University of Birmingham, and my degree was in natural sciences, which might sound like it's biology, but in my case was not. And natural sciences is a degree that's offered by some universities where you're allowed to take modules from different sciences. So everything I was doing was pretty much in the sciences, but I did stuff from different subjects and different disciplines. And it's a really useful degree to do if you either aren't quite sure which bit of science is your favorite at the point at which you're leaving school, or if you know that, in my case, I did know that I had favorites, but often the favorites were the overlapping bits. So I ended up doing mostly chemistry and maths during my degree, but at the point at which I was applying, I was also quite interested in biology, and I thought I might be interested in biochemistry and genetics, which is obviously a bit where chemistry and biology meets, but then I also was really interested in bits where chemistry meets physics and where chemistry meets maths, and how like geometry can be used to explain bits of chemistry. So I decided to do a degree where I could do all of these different bits. And then if you do natural sciences specifically at the University of Birmingham, I also took modules on interdisciplinarity, which is the idea of like bringing different subjects together and how to do that to create new things. So that was really cool. And I did that with other students who were doing art subjects as well. So I got to do things like write an essay on how chemistry and art history interact with each other, which was really cool. So I just finished doing that. That was 4 years because I also did a year abroad where I studied at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And in September, I'm going to be moving to Sheffield to do a master's degree in materials science, which is the study of materials like plastics and metals and ceramics that kind of make up our everyday, and how doing things like changing them at the atomic level can have an impact on the kind of properties they have and how we can use them. And I would really like to, after that, so I'm planning to do a PhD and go into research after that. And I would really like to do something on solar panels is what I think I would like to do. And like studying how like we can improve the efficiency of solar panels so that we can get better renewable energy for helping with climate change. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So 3 really different experiences there. So it'd be really good to get more of an insight into what it is that you do and how you got there, and you've touched on it a little bit already. So I've got a couple of questions, and obviously any more that come in the chat, we'll answer those as well. So have you all always known that you wanted to pursue a career in STEM, or is it something that perhaps came later, or something that you maybe kind of fell into? So I'll leave the floor open for whoever wants to take that one first.
I'll go first. So I've always been interested in science. So I knew even in secondary school that I wanted to do science. So I grew up in Canada, and I did all of my education in Canada. So our system's a little bit different. So we needed to take 6 A-level equivalents to get into university. And I know that sounds a lot, but I think they're just smaller bits of learning rather than the big 2-year-long A-levels you take here. So I did my A-levels. I did biology, physics, and chemistry. And I also did 2 of the maths. So I did finite mathematics and calculus. So I did some really cool modules that way, well, A-levels, to prepare me to get into university. And then similar to what Eleanor did, I did my first year of university in natural sciences. So I took chemistry, biology, and physics, just to see kind of where your interests lie. And I really didn't care very much for my professor that I had in first year biology, but I knew I wanted to go into biology, which was, it was very strange. It was I almost went into physics, and sometimes I wonder how my life would have turned out differently if I'd gone into physics. But I went down the biology route, did my second year in biology. My third year, I specialized in that pharmacology degree that I told you about. And then including in my third and fourth year of university, because a degree is 4 years in Canada, I also did 16 months of placement. And that was critical to me deciding what to do with my future career. I did 8 months of placement in industry, so in a big pharmaceutical company, and I did 8 months of placement in university labs. And I very much preferred the environment in university labs. Not that industry was a bad environment, it just tends to be an industry you're told what to do by someone at a higher rank than you, and you just do the experiments. Whereas in academia, you get a lot more freedom to do what you want, what interests you in terms of science, and that really appealed to me. So I completed my degree, I went straight into a PhD, which in Canada can take up to 6 years, but I got lucky with science and I managed to finish in 5. And then I did extra training. So when you get a PhD, you sort of finish your education, and the scientific community says, okay, you've learned enough about your topic, you've done some research in your topic, now you need to go prove yourself. So you need to do something that's called a postdoctoral fellowship, that's kind of analogous to a newly graduated medic doing a residency. So actually getting the practice of what you've chosen to do for your career. And I got really lucky with my postdoctoral fellowships. I did 3 years at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, which was super, super cool because that is the university that gives away the Nobel Prize in medicine every year. So I got to see the press conference where they announced the Nobel Prize winners in medicine. That was super exciting. And it was just a really amazing place to do research. And Sweden's a fabulous country. Then I did another year of postdoc back in Canada. And then I came to the UK 10 years ago, and I've been here ever since. So I did 5 years at Imperial College London. And now I've been at Aston University for 5 years, and I've moved up the ranks from being a research fellow in London, and now I'm up to senior lecturer at Aston. So yeah, it's definitely been a good career progression. I'm glad I came to Aston. It was a good experience, and I'm really happy to be part of a really good multidisciplinary team where people really care about each other and really help each other out. So it's a nice department to be in, that there's a lot of variety in the research we do. And it's just what we call collegial. So everyone's really friendly with each other and very helpful. So it's a really nice place to work, and I'm really glad I ended up where I am.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Danielle, did you want to go next? I kind of had to remind myself what the original question was. I was so enthralled listening to Jill talking about all of your experiences so the question was whether STEM is something you've always wanted to do, or whether you kind of fell into it, or what kind of path you took.
Yes, so well, when I was younger, I originally wanted to be an author. I had a huge imagination. I still do have quite a big imagination, and would write lots of stories and loved that. But I was also always really intrigued by the world around me, about how everything worked. I would ask my mum lots of questions about why is the sky blue, and why is this that way, and how does that work? And I've always loved understanding everything that I can around me and how everything works. So at school, I really enjoyed science because I got the chance to answer some of those questions and find them out for myself, and doing all the investigating, I really always loved. So at school, I think it was when I was starting my GCSEs, I decided that physics was for me, that I loved physics. And knew then that that was what I wanted to go into. So I finished my GCSEs and did my A-levels. So I chose maths, further maths, physics, and I did chemistry as an AS level, because they're kind of the core subjects you need for physics. Physics is based on a lot of maths, so it's very helpful to have that. But chemistry also gave me an insight into another science. And then I went to go and study physics. But unfortunately, being away from home wasn't for me. I got very homesick. So after a year, decided to leave. But that was also good in some ways, because otherwise I wouldn't be in the job that I'm in now. So I had a couple of years out of studying and then decided that I wanted to study again, but knew that kind of the university method wasn't really for me, that studying full time was kind of a lot of pressure. So I decided I wanted to try an apprenticeship and work alongside studying, which is really good for me because I go to university 1 day a week and the rest of the time I'm at work. So I get a good balance between working and studying. I found my apprenticeship through the government apprenticeship website. So you can go on there and you can search, there's loads of different types of apprenticeships and they're all at different levels as well. So I'm doing a degree or a higher level apprenticeship, but you can do BTEC apprenticeships as well as like NVQs. There's loads of different apprenticeships that are on offer. So I found an apprenticeship and I applied, and luckily I got the job, which I was really happy with. And I'm now currently 2 years through it. So I've got a couple of years more to go, but I really enjoy it. I never thought that I would end up in a job like this. I didn't even know that Linux existed before I found the job, or even what they were, but I really love them now. And I'm a bit of a Linux nerd and love finding out everything about them. It's great.
Great, thank you. And it's really good actually to see the different career paths as well. So that if you're not the kind of person who wants to do a degree and then go and do quite an academic route, that there are actually lots of different options open. I think that's really good to know. Okay, and Eleanor, have you always known you were interested in STEM?
That is a definite no from me. I also amusingly wanted to be an author at primary school. And then when I was about 12, 13, I think I joined a creative writing club at secondary school. And I think I basically decided it was too much like hard work. And my parents are very like clear about, if you want to do something like being an author, like where you're self-employed, or like, because it's kind of similar to say something like doing art as well. They're very like, you can definitely try and pursue that career and we would support you, but you'd probably also need to get another job to support yourself while you're writing. And I was kind of like, yeah, I don't think I want to write enough to do that. I think maybe I'll write a book when I'm retired and I've got loads of time on my hands, but I'll leave it until then. And at primary school, I thought that I didn't like science and maths because I didn't enjoy them in school. I found them, I think probably they didn't really challenge me enough. I think what we were doing is quite basic. And I think that my school didn't do enough science for me. But at home, I was doing loads of science stuff without really realizing it. I got obsessed with planets. And when I was in I think year 2, I think it was about 7, I remember finding out that the sun is gonna expand one day and take over the solar system. And I got really upset and cried about it. My mom was like, that's gonna be in 1 billion years. So I was definitely passionate about science. I just didn't realize. And then in secondary school, firstly, I'd realized that those things that I liked at home counted as science. And then at secondary school, we got to do, real labs. And I had a couple of science teachers who were really important in making me realize that I really loved STEM and would really kind of challenge me. And if I asked provoking questions, they would be, excited and answer them. And I was also part of the Gifted and Talented Maths program, which really showed me what maths is, because I was doing maths the whole way through school and I don't think I really enjoyed it until I took it at university. Because part of the reason I wanted to do natural sciences, because then I could study maths without doing a whole maths degree, because I wasn't sure I'd like it, because I hadn't really enjoyed it in school, but I enjoyed doing stuff in the Gifted and Talented Maths program, because school maths is very different to what actual maths is like. So yeah, I really didn't know. And then when I got to 14, 15, and I knew I wanted to go to university because I just love learning, but it kind of could have gone either way of whether I did something artsy or something STEM. And I basically decided to do sciences because I found it more stretching and challenging and more kind of interesting. And I liked the fact that it was applicable to the real world. So I went for STEM for that reason, but you know, in another parallel universe, I think there's a version of me that's studying classics. So yeah, so I ended up doing STEM that way, and I'm really happy studying STEM, and I think it was a really good decision for me, and I really enjoyed the degree that I've done. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So do you think, I mean, you touched on this a little bit already, but do you think there's more to STEM than perhaps you realise when you're doing it in school? So I'm thinking of someone who maybe is in school at the minute or is studying in some way, shape or form, but thinks actually I don't really like science or I don't really like maths. Do you think that perhaps maybe they do like it and they just don't realise because what you do in school isn't necessarily representative? Or would you encourage them to look more widely about the different areas of STEM perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I think like if you don't like science in school, don't write it off straight away. Maths especially, I think science in school is more akin to what science is really like, although not completely. But maths especially, it's almost sometimes with school maths like if in history you were just taught a series of facts about what had happened in the past and you weren't ever asked to think about them critically, is what school maths can be like sometimes. You're just taught a series of facts and you're never expected to understand why they work or any of that kind of thing. And that's what maths is really about, is understanding why these things are true and how we can prove that they're true and how we know that they're true, and being very like, you know, everything should have an explanation. And in school maths, things don't always have an explanation. You're just told to memorize things. So if memorization is something that frustrates you about school maths, definitely go and have a look at other maths things outside of school. Speak to your teachers, because if you're really lucky, then a teacher in your school will be happy to kind of tell you more and that kind of thing. But also like go to museums, look stuff up, try and read books, because there's so much more to it. You kind of only really skim the surface of STEM in school. So if it's something that you're kind of like not totally sure about, give it another shot. And also if you don't like STEM and you don't want to study it necessarily, that doesn't mean that you have to write it off and not be a science person altogether. My mum and I really like watching history of science documentaries together, because I like the science bit and she likes the history bit, but she still finds the science interesting in the context of history. So there's something for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one thing I definitely found when I started doing science at university level is that there's a lot of unknowns. So learning science became more like solving a puzzle than being told, these are the rules, this is what happens, just memorize this list of blah, 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 and that's all you need to know. When you get, especially to university science, so like, you know, second and final year, it becomes a lot more obvious that there's so much that we don't know out there, and you really get to give your curiosity full rein. So at Aston Biosciences, a type of teaching we use is called problem-based learning. So the students come in and we give them a scenario or a case study. So so-and-so took a tablet, had a massive asthma attack, and ended up at A&E. What happened? And that's all the information the students get. So the students have to talk about different theories as to what might be happening, using their knowledge that they've learned already in university, and basically working as a team to solve a puzzle. And it's really exciting watching that coming together and watching students like, oh, I'm really interested in, learning about how asthma works as a disease, or another student might be really interested in what was in that tablet. And people can really, focus on what they really want to do, solve problems, do their own, sort of reading of the scientific literature and figuring things out, and just, moving your knowledge forward that way in kind of, I guess, more real life context. That you're not just learning out of a book, you're learning about how science impacts us in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and definitely through my sixth form as well, I would watch a lot of science programs, and I also read lots of books as well. There's loads of different science books out there. Some of them are also aimed at younger audiences, or they're a lot more funny as well. I read one about how to train your dog in quantum physics, which didn't actually tell you how to train your dog in quantum physics, which was quite sad, but it used the dog and the dog's life to kind of illustrate some of the theories, which was really interesting. And especially I think with physics, physics has lots of laws. You might have learned about some of them in school, but we have to learn from the bottom. So we have to learn about the basic laws first before we can then start to understand the more complex ones, or the cases where it doesn't quite meet the laws. And those are the bits that are really interesting, but we have to learn about the other bits first. But I think reading books and investigating those bits is really what can find the amazing parts of the world and the amazing bits of information that you can find out there. And I found like reading books really good way to just learn about other bits that you don't get taught at in school, or science programs as well really helped me to just find other bits that I was really interested in that otherwise you maybe wouldn't find. So there's loads of information out there.
Thank you. So it sounds a bit like the message is don't give up if you're perhaps think you might be interested in a STEM area, but you're not quite sure at the minute because in school maybe you don't like your teachers not delivering it the way you like, or maybe you think it's all a bit basic. Stick with it, have a look and see what else there is, because you might find something you didn't even know existed. And of course, I've got to plug our Fascinate sessions, because we have got sessions from all different areas of STEM as well. I myself have learned a lot in those areas of STEM that I didn't even think were necessarily STEM related before. And then when you think about it, I'm a bit like, well, of course it's related to STEM, but there's loads of them as well that you can check out. Okay, so the next question is, what does a typical day look like for you? Do you have a typical day, or is it varied?
Yes, so my typical day, I'll go to the workshop at the beginning of the day, and then we all run checks on the machines. So each day the machines go through a thorough check to make sure that they're ready for the clinical day. So we check all of the outputs of the machine, we check that it works properly, make sure that it's completely safe for use. And then once that's done, the machines are used clinically. So I go back to the workshop and we wait for the phone to ring. So if the machine breaks, the radiographers ring us on the phone, and then we go out and fix the machine. From then on, it can really be completely different. One day I can be fixing the water system, fixing one of maybe the water chillers, or the next day I might be replacing some of the electronics and replacing a circuit board. So it really can be completely different each day, but that's mostly how each day will go.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Eleanor, did you want to go next? I know you're in a bit of a transition point at the minute. We're just finishing studying, so I mean, it's up to you whether you want to talk about studying or going into work. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, so because I've not started a job yet, it's obviously a bit different, but I can talk about what a typical kind of undergraduate student is like. I mean, again, this is like my last year because of COVID has not been a typical year. And because I was doing natural sciences rather than doing single honours, my experience was very different. But generally, as a science student, you'll have lots of lectures. Art students tend to have more small group work, whereas science students are more reading. I hardly have to read anything as a science student. It's great. People just tell me stuff. So I have lectures which are, in a normal year, you'd be in a big room with, my lectures are between like 60 to 300 people. So it's a lot of people. And there's a lecturer, so someone like Jill is stood at the front teaching us about something. And the degree is split into different modules, which are on different subjects. So this year I have done inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry, graph theory, which is an area of maths, algebra and combinatorics, which is also maths, and then my undergraduate research project. So I'll have different lecturers for each of those modules. And then we also have tutorials, which are a small group of like 6 people and will be in a lecturer's office. Generally, we have kind of like problem sheets and things that we're working through, but they'll also ask us kind of provoking questions around that topic. And then depending on what degree you're doing, you will have labs. So I didn't have anywhere near as many labs as the single honours chemistry students did. So I think that they have in a normal year kind of 2 days. I think it's like 2 full days, so like an 8-hour day in the labs, twice a week, every 2 weeks, or it might be every week. Can't quite remember. I had it far less frequently than that. But that also very much varies between universities. Other universities will have like, you'll be in labs for say like each afternoon, or you'll have an intensive week of labs and then 3 weeks off. They all do it in kind of different ways. So depending on what you think might work best for you, if you're looking at degrees, you can look at different things. And then for maths, we didn't have any labs because obviously it's kind of more theoretical, but we had more kind of problem sheets to do. And in some cases, there were sort of like group classes or computery bits that we could kind of go and do. So there's lots of different things. And then this year, because I'm a final year student, I was also doing an undergraduate research project. My project wasn't lab-based, so I was doing a literature review. So I was spending several hours a week going through kind of reading papers on the subject that I was doing, and then collating information from all of those to publish a report about kind of the information that I'd found out on that topic. So yeah, that's what a degree is like.
Well, I'm really glad you went before me, because now I can just say, yeah, I do that teaching. Everything that Eleanor just talked about, I do all of that. So yes, as she said, I will stand in front of a big group of students and give them a lecture. At Aston, during the pandemic, but I think it might be something we stick with. We've been doing something called flipped learning. So I will record, say, a 40-minute lecture ahead of time. The students can watch it on our virtual learning environment whenever it suits them. And then I'll do a live session with them. We've been using, again, our virtual learning environment for that we do questions and answers. I like to do a quiz. And then I like to go through a recently published science paper as well, because I think it's really good for students, especially early on in university, to get used to reading research papers, because that's where science comes from. So it's really important that you're able to sort of navigate your way through that. So when you get to your final year project, like Eleanor was just talking about, you're able to do that literature review and you're able to find the information you need to inform the research that you're going to do. So research is another big part of my life. So I do still like to work in the lab. So this coming week, tomorrow, I'm basically going to spend the entire day working on writing a research paper. So the paper's already written. I'm just going to tweak the figures that have all of my scientific data in there. And I'm going to send it off to a journal and hopefully get it published. So fingers crossed, it goes through peer review and the other people in the scientific community like it and it gets published. So that's my day tomorrow. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I'm going to go into the lab. I'm going to stain some lung sections to try to answer a scientific question. And I'm going to run another assay that will tell me levels of signaling molecules different cells use to talk to each other. So that data hopefully is going to go into a different scientific paper. So I'm hoping to get quite a few papers submitted for publication this autumn, because I've had a lot of data building up over the years. And that's partially because I supervise a lot of students. So I have 2 PhD students and 2 master's students working in my lab. I also have 1 placement student. So he's doing a year's worth of placement work experience in a university lab in between his second year and his final year. And earlier in the year, I also had 6 final year project students in my group as well. So my group size gets really, really big when I have project students. And then right now it's really, really small because, the master's students have just finished and it's just me and the 2 PhD students, to be honest. I collaborate a lot with other labs. So I have a grant right now. So it's a big pot of money that we got to do some specific scientific experiments. And that's with some labs in the Netherlands. So I have monthly meetings with my colleagues in the Netherlands over Google Meet. And hopefully, if all goes well and I'm allowed to travel, I'm going to go visit them for a week in November and travel around the Netherlands and meet with my scientific colleagues and maybe talk to them about the science that I do. So that's really exciting as well. So yeah, research is a big part of my job. Most of the research I do is not so much hands-on in the lab anymore, though I still do get into the lab. Mostly it's taking the data that my students have generated and analyzing it and writing up into papers and getting it published and presenting it at conferences. So I need to talk about my science in front of sometimes a really, really big audience. I've talked about science to 1,000 people at a time, and that was really intimidating, but you sort of get used to it eventually. And the third part of my job is, I guess, service and public engagement. So what we're doing right now is actually part of my job. So this is public engagement, talking about science with the general public. I do a lot of science events with Girl Guides. I've done a space-themed camp. I've done a whole weekend of activities about our immune system and how we fight off infectious diseases. So if anyone wants more information on that, please do get in touch with me. And then I sit on a lot of committees for the university itself. So I sit on one committee making sure that any experiments using animals is done safely and ethically. I sit on the Equality and Diversity Committee because I think it's really important that academia includes everyone. So science is for everyone, and I want to see all sorts of different people in science, and I do what I can to make sure that happens. And then I also get to sit on the disciplinary board. So if students are naughty and maybe get caught cheating on an essay or something, I get to decide what happens to them. So that is, a very serious duty, but it's something that's really important for those students who follow the rules. It's good for them because, it makes sure that the quality of their education is really, really good. And, that we're keeping an eye on things and making sure that if you do earn a first-class degree, you definitely earned it. And that was because of your hard work. Yeah, so that's basically my job in a nutshell. As I said before, every day is different. It depends on what point of the academic year it is. So it's summertime. Summertime is usually research time. Whereas if you had talked to me back in February, I was teaching Sundays 6 hours a day. So it was a really intense bit of teaching. But yeah, it does sort of, things are busy at different times of the year. So I get a little bit of variety, which keeps things interesting.
Thank you very much. So 3 very much not a typical day answers, like there's no typical day in your careers, which is actually really nice. It keeps it nice and varied. So we are coming to the end of the session. We've just got a couple of minutes left, but I do just want to squeeze in one last question, which is, what would be your advice for any girls and women out there who are watching who maybe really want to go into STEM but feel a little bit intimidated because it tends to be quite a male-dominated environment? Obviously, it seems to be something that's growing and there are more women in STEM, but if there's anyone out there who thinks, actually, I'm not sure I can do that because I'm a female, what would be your piece of advice to them?
Yes, so I actually work in a workshop where I am the only female in my workshop at the moment. So I do work with a group of about 10, 12 men, but they all treat me as though I'm just one of them. I don't feel like I'm singled out in any way. It can feel scary and that you need a lot of courage to do it, but actually they all just treat me as though we're all human. Everyone around me is human, and we just treat each other for who we are inside rather than which gender we are, which is really nice. It's really nice to feel respected in my job as well. But I'd say to just have the courage and go for it. It can seem scary at first, but really once you get to know them all, it's fine, and it's really a pleasure to work with everybody that I do. So I just say go for it and have the courage.
Yeah, I think my career, my field is a little bit different because biology is, at least, unless you're talking about like the very, very higher up professors, which, we're still working on, most of biology is fairly gender balanced. So in terms of like, if you were to do a degree in biology, you would find that it's about 50-50 males and females. One thing I really like at Aston is how diverse our student body is, just in terms of ethnic background and gender identity. It's basically, we try to make sure everyone feels welcome in my particular environment. So yeah, I've worked in labs before in which I was the only woman. I've worked in labs before in which there were no men, and it doesn't really affect the science. Everyone just sort of gets on with their job and doesn't really focus too much on those details that really don't matter. As long as you're doing a really interesting experiment, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. I guess the one piece of advice I'd give everyone is to be creative and to basically talk to as many people as you can, find out what they're interested in, get their point of view. The more you learn about the world and the more you foster your curiosity, the better you'll be at science. Yeah,
I mean, much the same as everyone else. Chemistry, I found, is fairly balanced. Maths has a slightly more men than women, but it's, again, it's not too bad. I think physics and engineering can tend to be more male dominated. If I was going to put it as like a piece of advice, I think I would say, if you really love STEM, you don't go for it because you're a woman. I think, think about whether you'd regret that or not, because so when I was deciding what A-levels to do, I picked biology over physics. And one of the reasons that I chose it, it wasn't my main reason, but one of the factors was that I was worried, there's a fly in my face. I was worried that I would be the only girl or like one of two girls in the physics classroom, whereas I knew I wouldn't be in the biology classroom. And physics would have been a much better choice for me. And it still irritates me that I didn't do physics because there are things that I missed out on that would have been useful to know. And it's kind of frustrating that that was one of the things that affected my decision. And I really wish that I'd been brave enough to go, no, it doesn't matter. And it can be like scary and intimidating. But the other thing I would say is like, so there was a point where one of my tutorials for maths it was me and my friend, and then everybody else in the group was doing theoretical physics and maths, which is quite male dominated. And the men in that group were quite intimidating. And eventually I asked to be moved to a different tutorial group. And then we had a great time. It was just me and my friends, and we had a lovely time, and it wasn't intimidating at all. So there's also nothing stopping you if the men are being intimidating, you know, switching jobs, moving away. You can still do STEM without feeling intimidated, and you shouldn't have to put up with that. And there is definitely now space for women in STEM, and you shouldn't like feel afraid that you can't go for it for that reason alone. Yeah.
Yeah, the numbers are increasing all the time as well. There's always more women in science and in STEM, especially like in engineering as well. It's increased massively over the past few years. And the numbers in degree courses is really increasing too. So it's a really good sign for the future as well.
Oh yeah, I remember the other thing I was going to say was that there's research has been done that has shown that it's really important to have people from diverse backgrounds in STEM. So having women, having people who are not white, having people who are LGBT, bring different things to STEM. And we have new research coming out that wouldn't have been done if we just had straight white men doing research. So also by being a woman in STEM, you're doing science a favor. So it's even more reason to go for it. It's so important.
Yeah, agreed. Diversity is our strength.
Perfect, thank you. So the advice is go for it. In a nutshell, don't let anything put you off. If that's what you want to do, then absolutely go for it. Okay, and we've run over a couple of minutes, but that's fine because I think that was really useful, really worthwhile advice. So to anybody watching, thank you for joining us. There is a booklet on the Girl Guiding Midlands website. So if you go into the Girl Guiding Midlands website, then onto the events page and then down to Fascinate, there is a booklet which does have a little snapshot into the careers or study paths of some of the other members of the Fascinate team. So do check that out as well. And if you have any questions for any of the other members of the team or any of the team here today that you've not been able to ask, just pop them in the chat and someone will come back to you hopefully very soon. So that does actually bring us to the end of Fascinate. This is the last session. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, all three of you, for being here today to answer our questions as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was lovely.
Yeah, thanks. This is a really fun experience.
Okay.